In this video, I'm going to be talking about caffeine and how it affects your testosterone levels, your thyroid hormones, your metabolic rate. Why is it that some people are stressed out and anxious from consuming caffeine, but others get amazing results with it? I will show you the reasons why. I will explain what are the best sources of caffeine, how to use caffeine, and overall going over all the studies that I think will benefit you when it comes to your metabolic boosting your health journey. Because fundamentally, caffeine is a very popular compound that a lot of people use, but there's a lot of controversy and a lot of people don't really understand how caffeine works within the body. And this is why you need to stay till the end, because I'm going to change your mind when it comes to caffeine. And at the end, I'm going to show you how you can use caffeine to actually improve your sleep. So make sure you stay till the end and let's get into it. So to start off this video, I'm going to start with a Bible verse. So in 1 Corinthians 10:31, whether therefore you eat or drink or whatsoever you do all to the glory of God. And this is why this video is important, because I want to present to you the research when it comes to caffeine, and you will have a fundamental understanding whether what you're doing when it comes to consuming caffeine benefits you or is a downfall. So let's get into it. So what I'm going to do is start with a bunch of studies and just go over everything. And by the end of it, you'll have a full picture of how everything works. Also, I'm going to be using this, so always keep this in mind. So this is the function how hormones are produced. So the combination of LDL cholesterol, vitamin A, and T3 produces pregnenolone, and that's the foundation when it comes to testosterone, your protective hormones, and things like that. So I'm going to be using this throughout the video. So first of all, let's start with studies showcasing how caffeine affects testosterone DHT. So in this study, the researchers gave their subject different doses of pre-workout caffeine, 200, 400, 600, and 800 milligrams. In all groups, exercise-induced testosterone release was boosted by the ingestion of caffeine, and the increase was most significant in the group that received 800, which boosted testosterone levels by 19%. Cortisol, which is a glucocorticoid, increased by 44% in the group which received the highest dose. So a big thing that people mention when it comes to caffeine, it increases cortisol, so it must lower testosterone. So I'm going to explain to you why that happens, and you'll get the full picture by the end of it. There's another study showed that 4 milligrams per kilogram of caffeine taken 1 hour before exercise was able to rise testosterone levels by 12% in elite athletes when compared to a placebo. Then this study, by the way, I will leave a link down below to this document so you can have a look at the studies yourself. This study showed that chewing gum with 240 milligrams of caffeine was able to furthermore increase exercise-induced testosterone boost by 14% when compared to placebo. What's odd is that cortisol actually decreased in this study. So probably due to the chewing motion, which according to this research reduced stress. So the chewing motion is a way to release stress. That's why you see studies that put an animal through stress, and they have an animal that has no way of escaping versus an animal as well has no way of escaping but has something to chew on. It showcases that the one that has something to chew on has lower cortisol level because it gives it a feeling of being able to escape. When you have no way of escaping, you get into learned helplessness, and that's what stresses you out. So the chewing motion gives you this sense of escaping the stress, releasing the tension. That's why when you see people who do drugs, for example, MDMA, even cocaine, they chew a lot. They chew gum because they're releasing the tension. Even people who have high stress hormones, they clench the jaw a lot. Some people, even when they're sleeping in the morning, they might clench their jaw. It's due to the cortisol increase. So yeah. But I'm going to show you other ways besides chewing gum to not have such a huge spike in cortisol levels when using caffeine. So in a rodent study, it was noted that a single caffeine administration, undisclosed amount, was able to increase 5-alpha reductase activity by 30% via an unknown mechanism. So this is an enzyme that converts your testosterone into DHT. So that's the enzyme that does that. And DHT, if you look at one of my previous videos, the connection between testosterone and DHT, this DHT is good. Another rodent study used human equivalent of 2 to 4 milligrams per kilogram caffeine and noted up to 57% higher DHT levels. Amazing as well. Cacao and caffeine inhibit testosterone detoxification in the liver, which is good. Caffeine appears to lower estrogen, which means it's anti-stress. Estrogen is high during stress. And the aromatase enzyme, which converts your testosterone into estrogen, is high during times of stress. Caffeine at doses of 5 and 25 milligrams per kilogram improve sperm quality, increase steroid genesis, which means the production of steroids, enzyme activities, and reduce oxidative damage in the testes, which is amazing. One would say, okay, so caffeine has such an amazing effect when it comes to, as of now, testosterone and DHT. But how is this natural? Back in the days, you wouldn't be able to use this or whatever, and you would just have food. You even see this in that animals self-medicate. So caffeine is a way to self-medicate. Dogs do it when it comes to chewing on grass, when they have problems with their gut, to vomit it out. You even see it in other animals. What is it with dolphins, with pufferfish, to get high on it? So that's that. There's an article about that. So the biggest thing when it comes to caffeine, and just looking through Rapid communities, because Rapid recommends the use of coffee/caffeine. And the biggest issue is, but I get anxious, I get shaky, I get stressed. So let me get into it. I agree that studies show caffeine raises stress hormones, but it's important to understand the context of these studies and why this is happening. Most studies shown an increase in stress hormones used high doses of caffeine, often over 400 milligrams, taken with water or other non-caloric drinks to isolate caffeine's effects. Some doses were as high as 10 milligrams per kilogram, which can be dangerously high and even cause seizures in some people. A dose of 400 milligrams or more increases the basic metabolic rate by about 20% for 2 to 4 hours. This increase in metabolism requires fuel, which must come from somewhere. If you're not eating or don't have enough glycogen meaning stored glucose, sugar, carbohydrates, your body will get fuel from catabolism via cortisol and adrenaline. So when you run out of glycogen stores, your body spikes adrenaline. That's why you might get shaky, you might get cold sweats, to squeeze the last bit of glycogen from the liver. That will last a couple of minutes. And then it resorts to cortisol, which is a glucocorticosteroid, which means it regulates glucose. So cortisol, what it does is takes muscle tissue or any tissue, mostly muscle tissue. That's why when people fast for 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 days, they mostly lose muscle mass rather than body fat. So cortisol converts amino acids, which is through process called gluconeogenesis, converted in glucose to fuel the body, because your body needs glucose, right? Caffeine works similarly to thyroid hormone, even reduce. So this is the point one to why in all of these studies you might see an increase in cortisol when using caffeine, because when you use caffeine, it revs the engine, but if it doesn't have enough fuel, for example, having it with honey, sugar, it has to get the caffeine, the fuel from somewhere else. So what it does, it increases cortisol, and that's where all the shakiness, anxiety, and stress comes from. So that's that. Caffeine works similarly to thyroid hormone, even in reducing TSH levels like supplementing thyroid does. So when you supplement with thyroid hormone, it will decrease your TSH, which is thyroid stimulating hormone. TSH is responsible for signaling to your thyroid gland to produce T4, mostly T4, 80-20%. And then the T4 goes into the liver and gets converted into T3. But when your body's like, okay, we have enough thyroid hormone, there's no more needed signaling of TSH. But caffeine works similarly to thyroid hormone, so equally reduces the signaling of TSH. Taking thyroid hormone without enough nutrition also raises stress hormones often more than caffeine does. So both of them can increase stress hormones, and I'll go over that in a minute. Does that make thyroid hormone a stress substance? Not really, but anything that increases metabolism can be a stress substance if the body lacks the energy stores to handle the increased energy demand. For example, exercising on an empty stomach can also increase stress hormones and catabolism meaning breaking down, similar to caffeine. If you've ever looked into supplementing with thyroid, you may have heard the term of adrenaline hump. So when people take thyroid, you can take up to 50 mcgs of T3 per day from a repeat perspective, right? And you can do doses of 4 or 5 mcgs a dose every few hours, right? But if you've never taken thyroid and you're running on stress hormone, taking thyroid the first time can actually stress you out, because a lot of people who are hypothyroid, have low thyroid hormones, are running on stress hormones to maintain their metabolic rate, right? That's why people who have hypothyroidism, they're stressed out, they may have anxiety, things like that. And that's because the adrenaline is super high. Some people who have hypothyroidism, there's studies on this, they run on so much adrenaline to maintain their metabolic rate that when they're injected with an adrenaline shot, they don't feel anything, versus a person who is healthy will get a jolt from it, right? But because you're running on so much stress hormones, you're desensitized to it, right? So taking T3, what T3 does, thyroid hormone, it resensitizes you to the adrenaline. That's why thyroid hormones make you more experience life more. You feel life, if that makes sense. But it also resensitizes you to the stress hormones. So taking T3 can resensitize you to the stress, the adrenaline, just like the caffeine can resensitize you because it increases your thyroid hormones. And the way you optimize that is by fixing your deficiencies, mainly vitamin D, calcium, consuming enough calories that you're not in a deficit, electrolytes, sodium, and carbohydrates, specifically to replenish glycogen stores. So this is why you might be stressed out when you're consuming caffeine or coffee, right? Also, caffeine stimulates an increase of free fatty acids in the blood through adrenaline-induced lipolysis. This happens when you don't have enough glucose glycogen stores. There's an increase in oxidation of PUFA by the cells. So this could be another reason why you feel bad from consuming caffeine, is because your liver stores are depleted, you start consuming caffeine, your body needs to get fuel. One of them is free fatty acids. The free fatty acids are coming from your body fat stores, which most of the time are high in PUFA. The PUFA furthermore lowers your thyroid hormones, and it's just this cascade of negativity. So Ray Peat has said that when he didn't use thyroid, he took about 40 cups of coffee to mimic the effects of thyroid. So caffeine really works like thyroid. Caffeine has a half-life of 6 hours, while T4 has a functional half-life of 2 weeks. T3 and caffeine would be more comparable. Caffeine has a remarkable parallels to thyroid and progesterone, and the use of coffee or tea can help to maintain their production or compensate for their deficiency. This is why a lot of people enjoy caffeine. This is why a lot of people need coffee in the morning, and I'll go over that in a moment, because that's their way of keeping their metabolic rate high, because most people are hypothyroid. Women spontaneously drink more coffee premenstrually, and since caffeine is known to increase the concentration of progesterone in the blood and in the brain, this is obviously a spontaneous and rational form of self-medication. Though medical editors like to see things casually reversed and blame the coffee drinking for the symptoms it actually is removing. Some women have noticed that the effect of progesterone supplement is stronger when they take it with coffee. This is similar to the synergy between thyroid and progesterone, which is probably involved since caffeine tends to locally activate thyroid secretion by a variety of mechanisms, increasing cyclic AMP and decreasing serotonin in thyroid cells, for example, and also by lowering the systemic stress mediators. So that's that. Next we have, this is an article I highly recommend you give it a read, on Rapid Dune talking about caffeine. Caffeine, a vitamin-like nutrient or adaptogen. Here I'm just going to summarize the benefits. Of the benefits of drinking coffee. Caffeine. Coffee drinkers have a lower incidence of thyroid disease, including cancer, than non-drinkers. By the way, in this study, in this article, all the references at the bottom, so you see all the way from here, these are all official references, so I'm not making up random things. Caffeine protects the liver from alcohol and Tylenol and other toxins, and coffee drinkers are less likely than people who don't use coffee to have elevated serum enzymes and other indicators of liver damage. Caffeine protects against cancer caused by radiation, chemical carcinogens, viruses, and estrogens. Caffeine synergy works with progesterone and increases its concentration in blood and tissues. Cystic breast disease is not caused by caffeine. In fact, caffeine's effects are likely to be protective. A variety of studies show that coffee, tea, and caffeine are protective against breast cancer. Coffee provides very significant quantities of magnesium as well as other nutrients including vitamin B1. Caffeine improves efficiency of fuel use and performance. Coffee drinkers have a low incidence of suicide. Caffeine lowers serum potassium following exercise, stabilizes platelets, reducing thromboxane production. Caffeine stimulates the uptake, inactivation or storage of serotonin and inhibits blood platelet aggregation. Coffee drinkers have been found to have lower cadmium in tissues. Coffee making removes heavy metals from water. So caffeine also is very beneficial for removing heavy metals from the body because it increases the metabolic rate, stimulating the liver more, and more detoxifying is happening. Coffee inhibits iron absorption if taken with meals, helping to prevent iron overload. So iron accelerates PUFA oxidation and things like that. So if you're consuming things like white rice, which is high in iron or whatever, having a coffee with it will prevent the absorption of the iron. Caffeine, like niacin, inhibits apoptosis, protecting against stress-induced cell death without interfering with normal cell turnover. Caffeine can prevent nerve cell death. Coffee prevents Parkinson's disease. The prenatal growth retardation that can be caused by feeding large amounts of caffeine is prevented by supplementing the diet with sugar. So apparently the high consumption of caffeine when a woman is pregnant can cause the baby to have issues, and that goes back to the fact that the more the sugar the baby has, the bigger the brain becomes. But if you're just consuming caffeine, you're depriving yourself from sugar, so it makes sense by supplementing the diet with more carbohydrates prevents this from happening, which it's all a pattern, it all makes sense, right? Caffeine stops production of free radicals by inhibiting oxidant oxidase, an important factor in tissue stress. So that's some of the other stuff. In animal studies, caffeine reverses the state of helplessness or despair, often more effectively than so-called antidepressants. Have you ever felt down and you just consume some caffeine and you just are ready to go? Especially if you have it with some sugar and milk, because it increases the metabolic rate, there's more blood flow to the brain. And this goes back to temperature and heart rate. If you check your heart rate when you feel down and you don't feel like doing it, it's probably low. If you're stressed, it's usually high. And when you feel in that good state, which caffeine does, you'll be around 80 to 90 beats per minute. Now we have more research on caffeine. So when your intestine is extremely sensitive, the excipients and contaminants in any pregnenolone tablet could cause bad symptoms. The only supplements that are very safe to take orally are aspirin, cascara, some kinds of thyroid, small amounts of penicillin, cyproheptadine, and progesterone. Vitamin A and DHEA on the skin are safe, but you should put the vitamin A on your lower legs and wash your hands so that none of it gets on your lips. So this is just, if you're hypothyroid, you need to be extra careful with the source of caffeine that you're getting, which I'll get into in a bit. So the study, researchers found that a single injection of caffeine caused dose-dependent increases in the levels of pregnenolone, progesterone, and allopregnenolone in the rat's cerebral cortex. These increases were most significant with a dose of 100 milligrams per kilogram of caffeine, which is high. Caffeine also raised the levels of pregnenolone and progesterone in the blood, similar to the effects observed in the brain. However, the increase in allopregnenolone levels in the blood was highest with a dose of 50 milligrams per kilogram of caffeine. In this study, the researchers suggest that caffeine in coffee might help prevent thyroid tumors by stimulating the production of a molecule called cyclic AMP inside cells, which is known to inhibit cell growth. In this study, caffeine 64 milligrams, when added to aspirin 800 milligrams, significantly improves vigilance performance and increases self-reported efficiency when compared with either placebo or aspirin alone. Caffeine increases striatal dopamine D2 and D3 receptor availability in the human brain, which improves mood, happiness, better focus, memory, and less likely to get addicted. Caffeine may help with asthma. This goes back to that it lowers serotonin. Serotonin is responsible for asthma, right? Chronic caffeine intake decreases circulating catecholamines, which things like cortisol, and prevents diet-induced insulin resistance, which is diabetes, and hypertension, which is high blood pressure in rats. Coffee inhibits the reactivation of glucocorticoids. Effects of 16-week consumption of caffeinated and decaffeinated instant coffee on glucose metabolism in a randomized controlled trial. It showed that caffeine improves glucose metabolism. Caffeine and calcium ion stimulate mitochondrial oxidative phosphorylation into the human skeletal muscle fibers due to activation of myosin ATP. Caffeine speeds up energy production in human muscle cells by causing calcium to move out of specific cell parts. This makes the cell use more oxygen more quickly and boost their energy production. So this goes back to here. When there's more oxygen consumption, that means their metabolic rate is increasing. Back in the days, even nowadays, the way they would test for thyroid function is by checking how much oxygen you're consuming per X amount of time. So in this, you could see that caffeine increases oxygen consumption, energy production. Caffeine also helps the cells to use ATP, which is energy, a molecule that provides energy more efficiently These effects are linked to muscle enzyme called acetomosis eptase, which helps muscles contract. Then we have mitochondrial oxidative. When caffeine was added to human muscle fibers in the presence of ATP, their oxygen use doubled when using certain energy sources. This effect was stopped when substances that prevent calcium movement were added. The amount of caffeine needed for this effect matched what's needed to boost the activity of an enzyme called myostatin ATPase. So caffeine likely boosts energy production in these muscle fibers by making myostatin ATPase more active through calcium release from cell part called the sarcoplastic reticulum. So there you go. Then we have in a study with 12 healthy young men, they drank either decaf coffee or decaf coffee with added caffeine. Their metabolism and body temperature were measured before and up to 3 hours after drinking. When they had caffeine, their metabolism immediately sped up and stayed high for the entire 3 hours. On average, their metabolism increased by 7% during this time. Their body temperature also rose, but it took a bit longer to notice compared to the metabolism increase. So clearly increasing the metabolic rate, thyroid hormones, things like that. Then we have this paper looks at how drinking coffee affects blood pressure and the risk of high blood pressure. Studies suggest that regular coffee drinkers, especially women who drink 4 or more cups a day, may have a lower risk of developing hypertension, which is high blood pressure. However, short-term studies show that drinking around 5 cups of coffee a day can slightly raise blood pressure by about 2/1 mmHg. While caffeine is often blamed for this, other coffee components like polyphenols and potassium might actually be good for the heart. Though caffeine is often thought to increase blood pressure, the actual rise is minimal and may not happen without regular coffee consumption. Interestingly, plain water can lead to a significant spike in blood pressure, particularly in older individuals, whereas having a meal, especially one with carbs, can lower blood pressure. The boost in metabolic rate caused by caffeine leads to higher glucose consumption by cells. Therefore, studies that examine the effects of coffee on an empty stomach may not accurately capture caffeine's true impact, as they also involve factors like increased body temperature, metabolism, and adrenaline due to decreased glucose levels, which can complicate the assessment of caffeine's effects. Effects of caffeine on thyroid and pituitary function in newborn rats. It suppresses TSH, increases T3. So this is actually a study showcasing that caffeine suppresses TSH. In this study, low to moderate doses of caffeine, like those in a cup of coffee, can improve alertness, attention, and reaction time. Higher doses, like those in energy drinks, can enhance physical performance in activities like sports. For jobs where both thinking and physical abilities are crucial, like military or shift work, using caffeine repeatedly can help maintain performance, especially when sleep is limited. Then we have here, caffeine increases absorption and concentration of aspirin. So, the effects of caffeine on the pharmacokinetics and bioavailability of aspirin was studied in 12 healthy adults. The subject received 650 milligrams of aspirin, or the same amount of aspirin with 120 milligrams of caffeine orally. It was found that caffeine significantly increased the rate of appearance as well as the maximum concentration of aspirin in the plasma by about 25% and 70%. Meaning, and this goes back to the fact that back in the days, I just heard stories about this, that bodybuilders, back in the days when they did bodybuilding was just a hobby. So they would just work regular construction jobs. Not like nowadays, people can make a living out of it. So they didn't have a lot of money. So to make the steroid last, they would take the steroids with the caffeine, because the caffeine increased the bioavailability of the steroids. So they can take less of the actual steroids and get a good effect and save money. So that was a lot of studies. I went over the benefits of caffeine. So as you can see here, it just works by, if you have consuming enough calories, you have high enough LDL cholesterol by consuming enough foods, enough vitamin A from liver or even supplementing with it, and then you have enough thyroid hormone using caffeine, which increases glucose, oxygen, You produce energy, then you produce pregnenolone. I talked about this, progesterone, which is a protective hormone. You're going to produce things more like testosterone, DHT. The things like cortisol and estrogen only come from not consuming enough calories and being in a stress state. So that's the key factor. You need to be consuming enough calories. The last thing you want to do is consume caffeine while you're fasting and in a caloric deficit, because you're just going to be running on stress hormones. That's where the anxiety and things like that. Some of you watching this, you might not even understand what I'm talking about. Maybe you're in your early 20s, maybe you're in your teens. When I was younger, 17, 18, I could fast and take caffeine because I had high protective hormones. But the older you get, the less privilege you get and the benefit you get from fasting a lot. Because initially stress hormones might make you feel amazing because it's the catecholamine honeymoon. But overall, most people, when they get older, they experience stress and anxiety from caffeine, right? And you're seeing that nowadays. A lot of popular guys in the industry are talking about consuming 20, 30, 40 cups of coffee a day. This is why, and there's research behind it. A lot of people who don't know what they're talking about, they're like, oh, caffeine's bad for you because this and that. I just showed you otherwise using studies. Repeat, caffeine increases your metabolic rate, so it's important to take it with food, including enough sugar. So what if you can't tolerate coffee? I already went over why, because you're in a depleted state. And also, trial and error, like see how your body reacts. Also remember, when you're using caffeine, the reason why you get bowel movements from consuming coffee is because it increases energy. Same with if you take thyroid hormone, it improves your bowel movements because your body needs energy to have proper bowel movements. Sometimes if you're in a hypothyroid state, you're using coffee, increases the metabolic rate, you have a lot of toxins in your body, you're reabsorbing those things, hence why you might get bad symptoms from coffee. What if I remember when I was hypothyroid, all I could think was when I'm going to have my next coffee. When I woke up in the morning, the first thing that came into my mind was coffee. Because you're self-medicating, which is not a bad thing. It just showcases that you're in a hypothyroid state and your body's craving it, right? Like I remember, coffee was just on my mind constantly. There's different forms of caffeine. You can just drink coffee. You can chew gum with caffeine in it. Just with the gums, make sure there's no weird artificial sweeteners, things like that. You can consume pills, caffeine pills. You can have the caffeine pills, put it in like an orange juice, make your own energy drink. Change around the caffeine source. What about in the morning? If you're a healthy individual, you can get away with having caffeine first thing in the morning. And this has nothing to do with, because your circadian rhythm or anything like that you hear, or the adenosine, this and that. It's mainly to do with when you wake up in the morning, and most people nowadays are hypothyroid and they're in a liver glycogen depleted state, meaning you have no glucose storage. So when you consume coffee, you're stressing yourself even more. So I would start with getting some sugar into you, getting some fuel into you. And then once that's into you, you can have your coffee and you'll feel much better. You'll notice you can consume more coffee, you feel better. Some might even feel more relaxed because most people are running on stress hormones. They're constantly stressed out. They wake up in a stress state. They have some sugar, they have some caffeine, and they want to go back to sleep. It's not essentially a bad thing. It just signifies that you're in a stress state, and by consuming sugar and caffeine, which are anti-stress, your body can actually relax because you're in an intense state. You need to go through a period of time by going through this, so that when you wake up in the morning, you wake up from a restorative sleep, and the caffeine will actually boost your metabolic state. You feel amazing, and you'll have childlike, consistent energy throughout the day. How you can make coffee, if you don't know, just get yourself like a French press and do it. This is the best method to go about it. A lot of coffee machines have a lot of plastics and things like that. That's the way I do it. Also, the type of coffee that you're using. A lot of coffee has mold in it. So because if you're buying coffee, look at the quality of the coffee. How you're storing the coffee. When I used to be a manager in McDonald's when I was 19, when they would store the coffee, they would have a lot of procedures behind having it in a dry room away from the floor, because they understood that those things can happen. So make sure you get coffee without pesticides, because the pesticides, the mold, is what can cause you anxiety, right? So make sure the coffee that you're consuming is good quality. And when it comes to the sleep hack, so as I showcased to you, coffee increases the metabolic rate. When you increase the metabolic rate, your body can relax. When you see dead people, hopefully you don't, but when you see it in like movies or whatever, they're usually very stiff. That's why people who are in a hypothyroid state, they're very stiff, they're constantly getting cramps. And they've done studies when they put energy in an area of a dead person, it relaxes, because your body doesn't need energy to contract. It needs energy to relax. Imagine this is your muscle fibers. The cramp is when your muscles contract, but they can't relax. Hence why when you don't have enough energy, your mind is tense. You're overthinking, you can't relax. This is why some people might get insomnia from coffee, because you're stressing yourself out, because you don't have enough fuel. Remember, caffeine just accelerates your metabolic rate, but you need to give it fuel, like sugar, white sugar, honey, fruit. So this is the caffeine sleep hack that you can use. As promised, a combination of low thyroid and undigested food is the usual case of those sleep problems, since blood sugar normally falls at night, and with hypothyroidism, with the low blood sugar causes intestinal inflammation and activates the stress hormones. Milk with sugar or honey or ice cream lowers the stress hormones. A little bit of coffee and aspirin at bedtime can lower some of the chemicals that cause wakefulness. I personally consume coffee all the way up till I'm about to go to sleep, because caffeine just makes me feel better. It keeps the metabolic rate going. It only will stress you out if you're not consuming enough carbohydrates. You're depleted. That being said, this was the video. Hopefully you got some value from this, and right now you understand how to use caffeine and you understand how caffeine works. And make sure you join the Brotherhood community. I will leave a link down below. Community with other members, when I'm doing monthly collaboration calls that you can join. You have a classroom with courses. And yeah, that being said, if you have any recommendations for any other topics you want me to go in depth with, because this took me a while to get all the studies, bringing it together nicely, drop them down below. And yeah, God bless, and I'll see you in the next video.